Sheriff's Office YouTube page afterwards if you want to send other people to look at it, or if you have questions or anyone wants to follow up. And again, I do want to ask everyone, please do mute your mics when you're not speaking, just to cut down on the background noise, as always with this these online meetings, just to cut down on the background chatter. I can mute everyone from my end, but then it sometimes is difficult for people to unmute, so I'd rather not do that if I don't have to. So. Again, my name is Scott Field. I'm a consultant with a company called Wood Environment and Infrastructure based here in Denver, and I'm the project manager for the consultant team that's been hired by the county to help facilitate this process. Again, interview a couple folks from Jefferson County government. First, Erica Roberts, who's an emergency management coordinator with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. And then she's going to introduce Pat O'Connell, who's the floodplain manager for the county. So, Erica.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Erica Roberts. As Scott had mentioned, I'm with the Jefferson County Office of Emergency Management. I've been one of the lead facilitators of this project's planning process that is outlined by FEMA, working with our consultant Wood. We've been actively working on this project for 8 or so months. On my end and a few other county folks, it's been probably more of like a year and 8 months. So we're excited to be where we're at today. The 21 jurisdictions that have been on the planning team and will adopt the plan into policy will be eligible for pre and post disaster FEMA mitigation dollars, which means in turn more funding coming into our communities to mitigate risk for a safer Jeffco to live, work, and play. And we're just thrilled to be here. So thanks for your support, Scott. Just real quick, I wanted to introduce Pat O'Connell. Pat, do you mind popping on and saying hi? He's been supporting this process as well.
Hi, I'm Pat O'Connell in Jefferson County Planning and Zoning. I'm the county's floodplain administrator and get to work very closely with both Erica and Scott on this project, as well as all the other jurisdictions, because as everybody knows, the hazards do not respect any jurisdictional boundaries. Thanks.
Quite right. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Erica. So though Eric and Pat have been two of the people leading this process, it has been a very large planning team consisting not only of Jefferson County government, but also all the participating municipalities, fire districts, and special districts. I'm going to go through that list here in a bit. But it's been a very large and very robust planning team, including community groups, watershed groups, protection groups, and a wide variety of as well as like federal and state stakeholders. It's been a pretty broad variety. We've had great participation and a great time putting this together. So it's definitely been a it takes a village process here. So I'm going to go over kind of, again, what hazard mitigation is, why we're doing it, and what the process for this update has been. If any of you attended, we had a first public meeting back in January to kind of introduce at the beginning of the process. If you were on that meeting as well, then some of these slides should look familiar, but it's just a review in case for those of you who maybe didn't catch that first meeting. But we're just going to go over what we're doing here and why it's important. So first, just kind of to define some terms, when we talk about hazards, we're talking about anything that can cause harm or damage the community, and the community in this case being the whole of Jefferson County. Typically, we're thinking about natural hazards, things like flooding, earthquakes, tornadoes like we had in Weld County just yesterday, any of those kind of natural disaster type things. But it could also be a technological incident, such as a hazardous materials spill, a dam failure, or an incident at a dam, or even a human-caused incident such as a cyber attack or a terrorist attack or something like that. So hazard's kind of a broad term, but when you hear us say that, we mean something that can do bad things and cause damage and potentially loss of life, injuries and property, and damage to the environment and so forth. When I say vulnerability, that is basically how that hazard can affect the community. And basically, like, example, I mentioned the tornado up in Weld County that fortunately didn't do a significant amount of damage because it was kind of going through an open area. It didn't hit any real populated areas. So when we talk about vulnerability, we want to talk about the things that the people, the structures, the things that we care about and that we want to protect. And where those two overlap, you can see in this little graphic here. And I do this in every one of these classes where I point at my monitor, like you can see what I'm pointing at, and I apologize. But if you see on the left hand, we have those hazards that can do damage. And on the right side, we have the assets that we want to protect. And where those two overlap is what we call risk. That's where there's that potential to have damage and harm. And the goal of mitigation basically is to shrink that red overlap as much as possible and reduce that risk, either by reducing the hazard or controlling the hazards, or by reducing our vulnerability to those hazards. We're talking about sustained actions that we take before a disaster that are going to lower our risk to that hazard. The reason for doing this is pretty clear. If you've seen, if you watch the news at all, or you may well have the perception that that large disasters are on the increase. That's accurate. That's not just a perception. This chart here comes from FEMA, and it shows the number of billion-dollar disasters that we've had every year going back to the 80s. That's a disaster in 2016 or in 2018 dollars. The number of disasters that exceeded $1 billion in damages. And you can see in the 1980s, they were fairly rare. We'd only have, 2, 3, maybe 4 a year. Now we're having, 10 to 20 a year. And there's a number of different reasons for that trend. And you can see these are just from natural disasters, by the way. So you can see, for example, 9/11 isn't on here. We're just looking at winter storms, flooding. The biggest category is the green bar, which is severe storms, which covers obviously a wide variety of things. But you can see there's a tremendous amount of increasing damages to disasters like this. Another way of looking at it is just last year, just in 2020, that chart I had before only went up through 2018. So if anything, the trend is escalating. These are all the billion-dollar natural disasters that happened just in 2020. And you'll notice that the pandemic isn't even on this slide. So there's obviously a lot of this trend of increasing disasters is continuing, and it's costing more and more money. And we want to do what we can to reduce those costs. What's causing this increase? Well, there's the very short version, and there's a lot of I'm going to oversimplify a very complex issue here, but one part of it is just more people with population growth and community growth, particularly here in Colorado's Front Range. We have more people living in hazardous areas. And that means greater exposure, not just to the people that are living there, but also to more infrastructure, more buildings that are required to, or that are there to serve and serve those people. Additionally, infrastructure costs have gone up. Both the cost of materials has gone up. I saw something the other day that the cost of steel has almost tripled in the last couple of years, I think. So the cost of building infrastructure is increasing, and that's raising costs. But also, we're building better structures, we're building better buildings, while the cost, an interesting counter trend, while the number of disasters and the cost of those disasters has continued to rise, the number of loss of life from those disasters has gone down. And that's because we're better at building buildings that are less likely to fall over during an earthquake or severe storm. We're much better at protecting our people, and that's great. But that does come at an increased cost of construction costs and recovery costs in some cases. Also, we are seeing more frequent and more severe storms and severe weather. And a lot more what we're seeing also as a result of that is where one disaster can cascade into another one. And the classic that we've seen here in Colorado over and over is we have several years of drought, things get dried out, then we get more wildfires and more intense or more severe wildfires. And then after that, you have a nice burn scar that has increased your flood risk. So there's all of these disasters are often interrelated, and the more you have one, they tend to then cause additional disasters. So it's sort of a snowball effect there. So why do we want to do something about that? Well, the short version, of course, is that local government has a moral and a legal responsibility to protect the lives and properties of our community. But there's also just a financial case for doing it. As I showed in the previous slides, the costs keep going up, and just we can't do nothing anymore. The cost of doing nothing is too expensive. There are a lot of these disasters that are in these hazard events that we know are are fairly predictable. We can't tell you exactly where they're or when they're going to occur, but we know that they will likely occur. We have a pretty good idea of what are the areas that are most at risk of wildfires. We know generally what are the areas that tend to flood more often than not. And there are activities we can undertake that that can reduce those risks. There are things that work, that are very cost effective. And there's money available to help with those. And that's also something we're going to talk about here. So the bottom line is, you get this perception sometimes that, we have a disaster and then we rebuild and then we have another disaster, like the old Monty Python routine of the guy who built the castle in the swamp and then it fell over. So we built another castle in the swamp and then it fell over. So we built another castle and it burned down and then fell over. But then finally the fourth one stood. We want to try and avoid that cycle. What we're trying to do is break that, where we just keep rebuilding in the same area the same way and things keep happening. We want to rebuild better and we want to reduce those losses so that that cycle doesn't keep happening over and over and over again. I mentioned before that a lot of these actions are very cost effective. Excuse me, there have been a number of studies. This most recent one was from 2019, where they looked at a wide variety of different mitigation actions, specifically that were funded with federal grants, and found that on the average, every dollar that we spend on hazard mitigation, on reducing those losses, saves us $6 in response and recovery costs as a nation. So that's a pretty good return on investment. If I told you you could spend $1 today to get $6 back next year, you'd probably take me up on that. And this slide has a lot of different numbers on it because it looks at different types of activities. You can see things like, for example, wildfire mitigation, the return is a little bit lower because things like clearing brush and defensible space have to be redone every few years. But by contrast, flooding mitigation, the return is 7-to-1 on the average for doing flood protection projects. So it kind of depends on what you're doing and where you're doing it. But the bottom line is, for all of these, the financial cost for doing these, just totally aside from anything else, it makes good economic sense to do these apart from everything else. So the other reason why we're updating this plan is because it is a federal requirement in order to receive grant money. So Jefferson County does have an existing hazard mitigation plan that was passed in 2016. And it's actually, at that point, our company was known as Amick Foster Wheeler. We've been changed names since then, but we were helped facilitate writing the 2016 plan, and were brought back this year for the 5-year update. But there's a federal law that I'm not going to go too far down in the weeds on, called the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. But it basically says that in order to be eligible for these grant funds that I'm going to talk about for mitigation grants, local and state governments have to have a hazard mitigation plan that's been approved by FEMA. And what this plan does is it directs mitigation activities to try and make it a coordinated program where all the different mitigation actions are working together and everything's coordinated and pursuing the same goals and objectives. Talks about how we integrate mitigation into other planning mechanisms. I'll talk about that a little bit more. It's basically helps guide future development, how we want to build more and smarter and better and so forth in Jefferson County. The bottom line is to reduce losses and make the community more disaster resilient. And the plan is required to be updated every 5 years, which is why we're doing this update right now. So I mentioned before there were a number of participants in the plan, in addition to just Jefferson County. This is a multi-jurisdictional plan, so these are all the jurisdictions that are fully participating in developing this plan and are going to be eligible for FEMA funding as a result. So you can see we have a number of the municipalities: Arvada, Edgewater, Golden, Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, and Morrison, as well as a list of of fire protection districts. I'm not going to read them all there. You can read them. And then additionally, we've had both the Jefferson Conservation District as well as Denver Water and Lookout Mountain Water District have also participated in the plan for their assets in Jefferson County. So we've had, it's been a really great multi-jurisdictional planning team that's developed this together. So I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the planning process that we've going through, but just kind of, and if you are interested, there's a whole section on this in the draft plan. But basically, there's kind of 4 phases of the planning process. First is organizing resources, which is kind of the getting the band back together stage. You know, who was involved in the planning process 5 years ago, who's changed jobs or so forth. But, you know, there's someone, maybe some different people, but similar agencies and job titles and so forth. Who do we want to include this time that maybe we missed 5 years ago and so forth. So we're building this planning team. And part of that is creating a public outreach strategy, which involves this meeting and the other stuff that I'm going to be talking about from a public outreach standpoint. Phase 2 then is assessing the risks. That's where we look at as if, or what are the hazards that can potentially affect Jefferson County? Where are we vulnerable to them? What are the capabilities we already have in place to reduce those? And what can we do to reduce that risk and reduce those future losses? This is the what can be, or what kind of losses can we expect and what hazards are we vulnerable to? And then phase 3 is where we develop the mitigation strategy. And this is the what are we going to do about it piece. This is where we identify both overall goals and objectives for reducing risk, and then also, and more important, specific activities and projects and specific measurable things that the participating jurisdictions have all identified a list of activities that they want to pursue in order to reduce losses and reduce our vulnerabilities. And then lastly is adopting the plan and implementing it. This is definitely not a one and done process. And one of the things we're going to talk about is how this plan will be implemented over the next 5 years. So what we've done so far, as Erica says, this has definitely been, it's updating one of these plans. As you'll see when you go look at the draft plan, it's a pretty lengthy document, and it's been a fairly involved process to develop this. But we started off with a kickoff meeting in December. Prior to that, as Eric alluded to, was about a year of getting the grant funds and so forth and everything in place and hiring a contractor to help with the technical writing and so forth. But we formally kicked off the project in December, had our first planning team meeting in January, as well as we also had our first public meeting back in January. And then we've had a total of 3 planning team meetings, the first kickoff meeting in December, the risk assessment meeting in January, which is focusing on assessing the hazards, vulnerabilities, and risk, and then a mitigation strategy planning meeting in February. And since then, we've been finishing writing the plan and reviewing drafts internally with the planning team. So we had our first public meeting in January 14th, which was again really to introduce everyone to the process and to get input at the beginning of the planning process. As part of that, we did an online public opinion survey, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. And then now at the effective yesterday, we have the planning or the public review draft available for public review and comment, and we're going to have that open through the 25th. And I'll talk again in a minute about how you can review and comment on that document. So I said we did a public survey at the beginning of the process, and many of you may well have participated in that, in which case, thank you. We had a total of 951 responses, which is awesome. Anytime we get into 3 digits worth of responses, we're really happy. That was a great response. And you can kind of see here what the breakdown of what communities people lived in as far as who took the survey. And then we also asked how long folks have lived in the community. And the reason we asked that is just because, particularly for some of the other questions we're asking about, you know, how many hazards have you experienced in the last 5 years? Well, if we're getting a lot of responses from people who've only lived in the community a year or two, that changes the nature of that data. But as you can see, most of the people that are responding have lived in the county for 5 or more years, and more than half of them more than 10 years. So you have a lot of great historical record and historical knowledge of hazards. So one of the things we asked was we listed all these different hazards and asked, what do you, as members of the public and people who live and work in Jefferson County, what do you think are the threats or the hazards that are the most serious and that we should be paying the most attention to, or that you have experienced the most from? And basically, it's the people who rated the hazard as blue, rated the hazard as high is shown in blue. If they rate it as a moderate hazard, it's shown in gray, and if they rate it as a low hazard, it's in that kind of orangish color. So you can kind of see here the ones that were ranked the highest, probably not a lot of surprises. Wildfire, no surprise there. Drought, cyber attacks, definitely been in the news a lot lately. You can also see hailstorm, because we've definitely had a few of those in recent years. Lightning and severe weather. Pandemic, obviously, if we when we did these polls a few years ago, that one tended to rank a lot lower. And then the ones that ranked the lowest, avalanche, earthquake, tornado, land subsidence. So we'll talk about all these, and the plan goes into each of these in more detail about what the data says about what the risk from each of these hazards are, and again, what we can do to reduce them. But the planning team took the public rankings of those as one of the factors we considered when the planning team arrived at how we ranked those hazards and severity. So the next thing we asked was, what does the public think? What do you think we should be doing? We as Jefferson County government, what do you think local government should be doing to reduce those losses? And we listed a bunch of different projects, and you can see the one that came out the highest by far is wildfire fuels treatment, which is definitely one that the county is, not, when I say the county, I'm meaning the county and municipalities and the other participating jurisdictions and all that. It's definitely something that you'll see a lot of in the plan, a lot of projects of that nature. Also, forest health and watershed protection, very closely related to that. Water conservation, good to see that one ranked so highly, particularly for drought as a major factor here in Colorado. Good to see that getting some consideration. You'll see evacuation route development, improving the reliability of communications, public health incident preparedness. Again, definitely something that's been on everyone's mind over the last year or year plus. Public education and awareness ranking pretty high too. And we have a number of education and awareness initiatives beyond this meeting that are involved with that. And then assistance with defensible space. As not just creating defensible space around government facilities, but how we can help, or how we can give you the information resources you need to build defensible space around your properties. Anyway, so that was the results of the public survey. I just kind of wanted to go through those very briefly. The full results, again, are going to be included in the final plan. But it was great information, and the planning team looked at all of this, and it gave us a lot of great ideas for developing mitigation projects in action and how we should prioritize those projects going forward. So again, thank all of you who participated and took that survey. All right, so now I want to go ahead and introduce the plan. Again, the main purpose of this meeting is to introduce the updated hazard mitigation plan and ask for your comments and feedback on the plan. And we want, obviously, your comments and feedback today in this meeting, but also we want you to go look at the plan and kind of review it and give us your comments on it. It's a thick technical document. I'm not going to lie. It's not necessarily the easiest read, but there's I hope, a lot of good information in it, and information you'll find interesting and useful. What I want to do is kind of walk you through the table of contents and what's in the plan so that you have an idea where you might want to go look. So this is how the plan is organized. Basically, there's the three main parts of the document is the base plan, which is these 6 sections. There's an introduction, a community profile of Jefferson County and participating jurisdictions. There's a recap of the planning process we used. There's a risk assessment section, and then a mitigation strategy section. And then finally, how we're going to implement and maintain the plan going forward. Then there's a list of community annexes, and each of those participating jurisdictions that I mentioned, other than the county itself, each has an annex that goes into specific details for that community. And then there's a number of appendices which all have background documentation and technical information for the plan, particularly for FEMA approval and so forth. So you can go through each of those really briefly. The introduction section really just provides kind of the context and overview of the plan. It begins with an executive summary. So if you only have time to read a couple of pages, you can go in and read that, and that'll give you kind of the overview, kind of the bottom line of what the plan's really about, trying to condense it to as brief as possible. And then the background and purpose and scope kind of goes in why we're doing this and what the purpose of the plan is. The community profile goes into the different characteristics of the community and how they are relevant to the mitigation planning process. The base plan, this section focuses on the county as a whole, and then again, those community annexes I mentioned will go into more details by each jurisdiction. It also includes, you can see 2.7 there is a capabilities assessment where we look at what are the capabilities that the community already has in place, whether that's regulatory or planning resources like community wildfire protection plans, floodplain ordinances and regulations, things of that nature of what is already in place in existence. Financial capabilities of what funding sources does the community have in place to fund, to already fund hazard mitigation, what are the administrative and staff capabilities that are in place and where there might be areas for improvement there, and also what public information and public involvement groups exist and how that might be improved. Section 3 details the planning process. It's the long version of all those slides I just went through, and it goes through and talks about what happened in each of the meetings and how each of the steps of the planning process, how everybody was involved in the planning process. We can document for FEMA that everybody participated. Now, the risk assessment piece, that's really the meat of the plan, and it's over half the overall document is this section here. This is where we go into the actual hazards that we're listing, and I'm going to talk about what those look like in more detail. But this is really kind of the meat where we dig into each of those hazards, what are the vulnerabilities to them and the risk associated with that. A lot of maps, a lot of tables and technical analysis, but a lot of really good detailed information in there. And then the mitigation strategy section, as I referred to before, is the what are we going to do about it? It talks about what are the overall goals and objectives of the mitigation program in Jefferson County. What has been done on the actions from the previous plan. There were a number of actions, as I said, identified in the previous plan, so we report on what's been done on each of those. Talk about how we went through the process of identifying and prioritizing new mitigation actions. And then we have this mitigation action plan, which is the list of projects or specific actions and activities that the county wants to pursue in the coming months and years to reduce risk. And then each of the community annexes, I'll talk in a second, also has the list of actions for that community. Then the last section in the base plan goes into how are we going to implement this plan going forward? How is it going to be maintained? How is the progress of the plan overall and the progress on these individual mitigation actions going to be tracked? How are we going to monitor that? How are we going to update the plan again in 5 years? How are we going to keep the public involved throughout the process over the next 5 years? And then how do we integrate mitigation integrate the mitigation plan into other processes and documents so it's not just something that sits on a shelf as kind of a standalone plan? How we can integrate those two together. As I mentioned, each of the participating jurisdictions has its own annex, which is basically a mini version of everything that I just mentioned in the base plan. And it goes into, whereas the base plan talks about the county as a whole, the Arvada annex will go in, okay, so specific for the city of Arvada, here's, where the flood risk for Arvada is more, it goes into more detail than the countywide plan. And instead, whereas in the base plan, you'll see countywide maps. These community annexes will have more specific and focused maps and analysis of what the assets at risk are in each of those districts. I do want to point out here at the end, there were 3 participants in the 2016 plan that weren't able to participate in the planning process this time around. It was the town of Lakeside, the town of Mountain View, and Pleasant View Metropolitan District. And they weren't able to participate this year just because, there's been a lot going on this last year. No harm, no foul. But so they have participated in the process to some extent, but they weren't really able to attend all the meetings and identify new mitigation actions and so forth. But they had annexes in the previous plan. We don't want to throw that away because there's still some good information and analysis in there, even though we didn't update a lot of that for 2021. But you'll see those 3 annexes are going to be in the plan without, basically it'll just be the 2016 version of those annexes. We're going to include that in the final version of the plan. All right, so now I'm going to go through, that's kind of the overview of the plan. Now I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the key elements of the plan and what are the key pieces of information you can find and where you might go looking for them to find the parts you're interested in. So one of the things we look at for in terms of identifying hazards is we look at what's happened in the past, and the place we start with that is looking at what major disasters has Colorado and Jefferson County experienced over in the past. So this is the list of federal disaster declarations that have included Jefferson County going back to when they started doing disaster declarations in '56. You see Jefferson County's had 13. It's about in the middle compared to other counties in Colorado. This is Larimer is the winner up there with, I think, 24 federal declarations or something. But Jefferson County's had 13. Pretty evenly split among different hazards. You can see 4 were wildfire declarations, 4 of them for flooding. One of those, of course, was the 2013 flooding. 2 biological declarations, and that was for the current COVID pandemic. There was an emergency declaration at the beginning of last year, and then the disaster declaration that followed it. 2 declarations for severe winter storm. And everyone wants to know how we got a coastal storm disaster declaration in Colorado. That was actually for Hurricane Katrina, and because we assisted with refugees and evacuation from the Gulf Coast, we were included in the presidential declaration for that. So even though it wasn't our disaster because we participated in it, we were included in the declaration to be eligible for funding. So I listed the hazards before in the public survey. This is the list of hazards that were included in the plan for this year, and this is the ranking that we put that the planning team felt based on analysis and the experience of the planning team members of what how severe or what the risk from each of these hazards are. And we kind of looked at it in 3 areas or 3 different key categories. One is the geographic extent, how much of the jurisdiction is at risk from it, and when the disasters do happen, is it something that tends to affect a relatively narrow area, or is it something that's more widespread, like an earthquake or something? What is the potential or of future occurrence, or how likely or how frequently does this happen? Is this something that happens every year? Or is it something that happens every 10 years or every 100 years? What's the frequency or likeliness that these disasters occur with? And then how bad are they? What's the severity or magnitude of disasters that either both what do we typically experience, and then what are kind of the plausible worst case scenarios of what we might expect from these? So you can see, and I'm not going to go through and read this whole list for you, but you can see a lot of the ones very similar to the list, actually very similar to the rankings from the public of wildfire, flood, winter storm, hail, dam failure, and pandemic, all ranking very high. And it's worth noting that just because a hazard is ranked low doesn't mean that there aren't still actions that can be taken, and doesn't mean we still don't want to do things to reduce risk from these lower ranked hazards. It's just that we kind of focused primarily on the higher and medium risk hazards. So when you go into, as I mentioned in the risk assessment portion of the plan, for each of those hazards has its own chapter, basically, that breaks down the risk from that hazard. And you'll see, particularly for areas that are geographically specific, we have a lot of mapping. So this map here shows both here as a countywide map, and then here zoomed in for the city of Arvada shows the FEMA designated floodplains, both the 1% annual floodplain, which used to be called the 100-year floodplain, but that's the area where it has a 1% chance of flooding every year on average. And then also the 0.2% floodplain, which is also sometimes called the 500-year floodplain. So you can just, and then there's some other risk areas as well. As you can see, Zone D is an area of locally identified flooding risk. But each of the hazards that has that is geographically specific like that, you have some great maps you can look at to try and get a sense of where the area is most at risk. And then what we've also done once for particularly for the hazards where we have that like geographical data, then what we can do is overlay that on assessor's office data and find out, okay, well, what's in those areas that are at risk? So for example, we overlaid that map of the 1% floodplain with residences and structures and that are there, so we can find out, okay, how many structures are in the floodplain, how many are commercial, how many are residential, how many are mixed use, what's the average population that we estimate as living in the floodplain. And it's broken down, as you can see. This isn't a complete table, but we have these for each of the jurisdictions, again, for those hazards that we have that data for. In addition to looking at general property and structures and population, we also look at critical facilities that are potentially at risk. And this list down here across the bottom of the slide, you can see there's 7 lifeline categories, which is just a categorization that FEMA uses to kind of categorize and group infrastructure together, and we've used that to kind of group different facilities together. But you can see, we'll show here for the 1% floodplain, how many communications facilities are potentially at risk, how many energy sites, how many hazardous materials sites are located in the floodplain, things of that nature. And again, the plan goes into more detail. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time walking you through this, but just again, for each of the hazards, that's something we look at, is what are the critical facilities that are needed to keep normal operations going in the jurisdictions, and how can we focus on protecting those. Related to that, and also this another flood-related thing, there's a voluntary program that Jefferson County participates in called the Community Rating System. And this is a federal program. It's through the National Flood Insurance Program. And the goal of it is to reward jurisdictions that are doing a good job of mitigating against flooding and of floodplain management practices. And what it does is there's a list of activities you can do, and you get rated by the CRS program for how good a job you're doing, and you get a rating going from 10, which is the lowest, up to 1, which is the highest. And the better your rating is, you get a discount on flood insurance policies for people who hold flood insurance policies. So you can see for the county, if you live in the unincorporated county, Jefferson County is a class 5 ranking in the community rating system. So you're actually paying 25% less on your flood insurance than you would if Jefferson County wasn't in that program. And you can see it ranges for some of the different communities. They all have different rankings based on the individual activities. This is a pretty, there's a lot of work that goes into these rankings. And the thing I want to highlight here is that this right-hand column you can see is the improvement that all of the jurisdictions have shown just going back over the last 10 years. Most of the jurisdictions have gone up in their rankings. Lakewood and Westminster already started out as class 6, so they started out pretty high. But all the other jurisdictions, you can see, a lot of 9s and 7s here in 2010, and now a lot of much higher rankings, and that shows great progress. And again, the reward from doing that, kind of the carrot, if you will, is lower flood insurance rates. But what it also translates to is reduced flood risk. I referred earlier to the goals and objectives of the Hazard Mitigation Plan. These are the 3 overarching goals, which is kind of the vision statement or the broad policy goals of what we want to accomplish with the mitigation program in Jefferson County. And you can see they're pretty broad. The first is public education and awareness. Make sure that people understand both natural and human caused hazards, what the risk is from those, and what local government is doing to reduce that risk, and how you as individuals, residents, business, community leaders can mitigate and reduce those risks. The second goal is to actually reduce those impacts, and actually the mitigation actions we're talking about, to reduce those impacts, reduce the threat to life, property, and the environment. And then finally, strengthening partnerships. Mitigation is definitely not something that is, as is reflected in, as I said, the broad nature of this planning team for this project. It's something that touches on a lot of different programs, a lot of different departments, both government agencies, private sector, quasi-private groups, different levels of government, different jurisdictions. So the more we can build those partnerships, the stronger the stronger our mitigation efforts are going to be. All right. So I've talked about mitigation actions and activities, and what I want to talk about what I mean when I say that, or what type of actions you're likely to see in the plan. There's 4 broad categories that they group mitigation into. The first is plans and regulations. That could be something like floodplain ordinances or restrictions on who can build in certain hazard areas. Could be adopting building codes or more updated building codes and requirements, requiring ignition-resistant shingles or something in wildfire risk areas or anything of that nature, improving community rating system ratings, anything along those natures that's of a planning or regulatory nature. Structure and infrastructure projects is generally kind of the biggest category, and when most people think about mitigation, that's kind of what they think of is the traditional, more construction-related type stuff, and that can mean anywhere from something small, like there's a culvert here that gets backed up, so we're going to dig that up and put in a bigger culvert here, or we're going to reinforce this bridge. We're going to do flood proofing of this building or this critical facility to reduce damage, all the way up to you can see an example of we're just going to pull this home out of an area that's at risk and move it to some place that's not going to flood. Or we're going to purchase this area that floods every few years and we're going to convert it to green space. So we're going to convert it to open space or parks or something of that nature. So stuff like that. Natural systems protection, again, can be a wide variety of stuff. We mentioned for wildfire, a really common one here is that fuels thinning and creating defensible space around structures where we're getting nature to work with us instead of trying to work against nature. Can also mean restoring river channels or wetlands, anything stuff along that line, where again we're restoring that natural balance where nature itself is going to help mitigate against these hazards. And then, as alluded to, education and awareness is also a big thing where we're letting people know what can be done to reduce losses. So in the plan, each of the jurisdictions has identified, and they all had projects that were listed in the previous plan. I should note there's some districts here who have NA under these first columns. That's because they didn't participate in the 2016 plan. I realized I forgot to highlight that in the previous slide. While we had a couple jurisdictions or three jurisdictions that participated last time but weren't able to, but we also had 5 new ones that weren't able to participate last time that did join this time. So you can see there's 5 fire districts that were able to, additional fire districts that were able to join us. And each of these districts has, so you can see how many actions they had identified. There were 74 actions identified in the previous plan. Of those, 11 have been totally completed. That may not seem like a high number, but remember, a lot of these are big multi-year projects or aspirational projects that were listed, of we're going to try and find funding for this some way. So they're not all stuff that can be knocked out really quickly, but that's very good progress. There were a number of other projects that are in progress and just haven't been wrapped up yet. There were 7 actions that were identified as no longer relevant. Either this wasn't able to work, or we realized we couldn't get funding for it, or our priorities have changed, or the situation has changed, or something else has happened that has made this irrelevant. So there were a handful of actions that were deleted from the plan. And then, so of those 74 actions, 56 actions were carried over into the new plan. And then 65 new actions were identified and added to the plan. You can kind of see the breakdown here. I should note this is a draft plan, so some of these numbers, some of the mitigation actions, particularly for some of the jurisdictions, are still looking at a few of them. So some of these numbers may change. But as right now, there's a long list of different actions. And you can go in, when you go into the draft plan, said the base plan lists those county actions, and then each of the community actions will list the action specific to that jurisdiction. But you can see I've listed a couple from the North Fork Fire Protection District. One action on public outreach and education, specifically for wildfire mitigation. And this was a continuing action from the 2016 plan. And you can see here, which hazards it addresses, how it ties into the goals from the plan. The cost estimate, who are the partner district or partner agencies they're working with, a priority, when they think they're going to be able to finish it. And then here's kind of for the plans or the actions from the 2016 plan, here's kind of an update on what they're doing or what the status of it is. And then for the new actions, you'll just see new in 2021 over here. But you can see, for an example here, North Fork is going to update their community wildfire protection plan. So there's again, tables in the base plan and in each community annex listing those actions. So please take a look at those. Let us know what you think, and again, let us know what we're missing too. All right, so lastly is the implementation and maintenance stage of the plan. And again, this is we don't want this to just be a pretty document that we spend a lot of money on, and then it sits in a pretty 3-ring binder on a shelf for 5 years and doesn't get used. That would be a waste of everybody's time and effort. We want this to be something that is an ongoing living document and an ongoing mitigation program that continues going forward. So as part of that, and I'll ask Erica to talk about this a little bit, the planning team is going to be transitioning to a formal body called the Jefferson County All Hazards Advisory Committee, or All Hazards Mitigation Advisory Committee. I'm missing a word in there. And I'll ask Erica to talk about that here in more detail. But so this section also spells out how each of the different jurisdictions is going to integrate mitigation into their other plans, whether that's their comprehensive plan, emergency response plans, recovery plans, stormwater plans, anything of that nature, how these the information plan can be integrated into those. It spells out how we're going to continue to incorporate the public. Again, we want this to be a community-wide process, so how we're going to incorporate those. And then again, how the plan will be updated every 5 years. So Erica, do you want to talk about the AMAC?
Sure. I mean, straightforward. I think you covered it well. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. This will actually be one of the first all hazard advisory committees to be adopted formally by the Florida County Commissioners across the state of Colorado. It's just really acknowledging how important this plan is to us, that it will be implemented, it will come to life. Over the last 5 years, a lot, as Scott had mentioned, many projects were funded and were implemented, but we want to try to leverage all of the participating agencies that are coming together that have been part of this process to sort of say, okay, what mitigation funds can we pursue? How can we do it in a more collaborative way? I think the federal government has acknowledged, recovery is very, very expensive, and more mitigation dollars are becoming more available. We're also understanding that there's going to be a forecasted requirement to report annually to the state or the federal government. And so we want to position ourselves to have our organization in place, and understanding of, what everyone's doing and how we can support each other to just mitigate what we can within the county. So, more to come. It's ever evolving, but we're excited to have the support of the commissioners and to move forward with this.
Thanks, Erica. And this is huge. This, as Erica mentioned, this is not something that's really commonplace across Colorado or really nationally. And it is something that FEMA's recognized that the weak spot in mitigation nationally right now is kind of that follow through and implementation piece. The rumors that we're hearing is that there's going to be guidance, new guidance coming out from FEMA that's going to be requiring more annual updates and activities. We haven't seen that yet, but Jefferson County is not waiting to be told that. The county's decided to move forward with that and really lean forward, which is great to see. It's really kind of going to be a leader in the state on this sort of thing. So that's an overview of the plan. I said it's a thick document, but hopefully it's well organized that you can find what's in it. The reason we're introducing this, as I said, is we really want to get your feedback and input. We want this to be not just something that a bunch of government folks and some contractor wrote up, but we want it to reflect the needs of the community and the information and the knowledge and the lived experience of the community. So just as we wanted your input at the beginning to help inform it, now we want you to tell us how we did. So there's a couple of ways you can review and comment on this, and there's 2 different links here. And I'm going to go ahead and put these in the chat as well, if you want, on here. I should copy these ahead of time. Oh, doesn't like that.
As Scott's doing that, just to let everyone know that this will live on the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office webpage, and so you could just search Jefferson County Hazard Mitigation Plan, and you'll easily be able to find this landing page. And then the virtual link, the virtual public space link will be there, and will also be pushed broadly on social media. On our landing page, my email address is there for you, and so for some reason, if you have issues accessing it, you can reach out to myself, and I'll assist you the best I can. And if I can't assist you, I'll bug Scott to help you out. So we'll get you taken care of.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, so I put those two links in the chat. This first one I'm going to show you is a virtual engagement room, virtual space that we've created. When you click on that link, it'll take you to this room. There's like a click here to accept terms and conditions box, and then it's going to take you here. This is just a virtual simulation. If you've ever been to, like, a public meeting, or where we do public rooms where we have information on a plan update, or like a zoning code update or anything, then this will probably look familiar to you. We're trying to mirror that. But you can basically, it's just a way for you to access the information and learn more about it. Again, feel free to, you can drag on this and move it around to look at what all's in here. I'm going to give you a quick, sorry, I don't want to, hope you're not getting dizzy as I zoom around here. You can also zoom in so it's easier to read some of the panels, but we start off with, again, for those of you here today, you've already heard some of this, but as a refresher, or for other folks, what mitigation is, why we're doing it, what are the hazards we're addressing, what we're going to do about it. Here's the actual draft plan. Here are the different participating jurisdictions. And then here's the actual comment form. So these, when you look on these, above each of these panels, there's a different hyperlink. If you click here, we'll pull down here a little bit. This link will take you to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office webpage that Erica mentioned, that also has additional mitigation information and other information on emergency management and preparedness in the county. And also, I think that page has links to the individual programs for the municipalities, I believe. Or you can Google, whichever town you live in. If you Google your town name and emergency management, it'll take you to that program page. This link here will bring up the list, that hazard rankings document that I showed earlier. This link here, if you're curious for more information, this is a great website put together by ADOLA, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, in conjunction with University of Colorado at Denver, called Planning for Hazards. And it lists a wide variety of natural hazards and information on them, and things that both government and businesses and homeowners and people can do to mitigate and reduce losses from those hazards. If you click here on this link, you'll actually, it'll download the draft mitigation plan as a PDF document for your review. If you click here, because we have so many of these different, for each of the jurisdictions, what this link here does, it'll actually take you to a new room that looks just like the first one, except, wait for it. Okay, where we have each of the participating jurisdictions, and then you can go to these links to download those community annexes. And the only reason we did that, honestly, is in this, the main room, we're limited on the number of panels. And if we tried to list all 21 links here, it just scrolls up off through the roof and you can't actually access it. So, so basically, this just takes you to a second room that has each of those jurisdiction annexes. Again, the jurisdiction annexes really are just meant to be more specifically focused in the base plan. If you're looking at the annex and you're thinking, wow, there's really not that much information in here, that's probably because it's in the base plan. The annex isn't repeating everything that's in the base plan. It's really just saying what's different for that specific jurisdiction. So it's really meant as a supplement for this main document over here, but we encourage you to take a look at all of that. If you look down here at this table, the map table, we have a number of different maps you can download. These are all in the plan as well, so you'll see them in there, but we just put some of the main plan maps in here just kind of as examples of the type of stuff you'll see in the plan. And in this panel, if you click here, you'll be taken to a comment form to submit your comments. Please feel free to give us as much information as possible. It's a very open-ended form where we just kind of ask, who are you, what community you live in, and what do you think? And that what do you think you can go on as long as you want and tell us. You can give us specific, if there's specific, like on page 37, there's, this information is missing or something, we'll take that. If it's more broad, general comments, those are fine too. However you want to do that. If for some reason or any reason this comment form isn't working, please feel free. You can just email those comments to Erica or myself, and our email addresses will be listed here on the last slide. Just scrolling around the room over here on the back end of the room, if you go here to this kind of like side table here, you can download the slides both from today's meeting and from the meeting we had back in January if you want to review those. This panel just goes into a little more detail about Wood, the company I work for, and kind of what we're doing, and a link to our website. And if you missed that January meeting and you want to see more with that, or if you have someone who's interested and they want to start here, this link will actually take you to the sheriff's YouTube page, and you can view that meeting there. Once we've done with this recording, we'll add that here as well, so people can rewatch and review that meeting. So again, that's what the virtual room looks like. The other link that was on that slide that Erica referred to, it just takes you to the county's Hazard Mitigation Plan page on the sheriff's website. They haven't been uploaded yet, but the base plan and annexes are going to be uploaded on this page as well, so that if for any reason you have any difficulty with the virtual room, you can download them here. But you can see there's links here to get to that virtual room, and in the virtual room there's a link to get back here. So pretty much any of those we've tried to give you as many ways as possible to give you the information that you need. So. And again, we'll take your comments if you want to. If for some reason that form doesn't work for you and you just want to email them to us, that's fine too. So what's coming next? As I said, with the plan is going to be available for public review through June 25th, so with a 3-week comment period. Once we've got all the public comments, we're going to take all those comments, collate them, go over them with the planning team and the participating jurisdictions, decide what changes we want to make to the plan. We want to incorporate those comments or additional information into the plan. And then in July, we'll be submitting a final draft to the state of Colorado for review. Once the state reviews it, we'll make any corrections or revisions or additions that they request or that they want to see. And then in targeting August, we'll submit the plan to FEMA for their review. Both the state and FEMA have been pretty quick about turning stuff around. We always give the state a month, and they usually only take a week or two. So they're phenomenal at getting stuff turned around. And FEMA by statute has 45 days, but Region 8, which is the FEMA region we're in, which has offices actually in Lakewood, they're also really good about getting stuff turned around, usually within a month. So this is, these are kind of, I don't want to say worst case dates, but we kind of given them, we give them more time than they probably need. But then, so FEMA will review that plan, and then once they come back and say that the plan looks good, then the county and all the participating jurisdictions will take it to their governing board, so the Board of County Commissioners or your city council, town council, board of directors for the fire districts to formally adopt it, targeting November and December to get those adoptions made. And then once all the participating jurisdictions have adopted it, then the plan is finalized and formally adopted, and then it's good for another 5 years. And then we, again, move into that whole implementation phase. Okay, I know that was a ton of information, and I tried to keep, right about on 1 hour. Okay, so I know I went through that a little quickly, mostly because, like I said, I really want to, it's really just kind of meant to give you a taste of what's in the plan and what information you might be able to go find in there, and give you a sense of what's kind of going on with this process. Don't want to go into too much detail because we want you to go in and read the plan for the things that interest you. But we also wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and comment. I don't see any in the chat yet. But at this point, we're just going to open up the floor for questions and comments from the public. And again, as I said, you can if you want to just type your question into the chat, that's fine. Or if you want to go ahead and just raise your hand, or like I said, we've got a fairly small group, so I think if you probably just want to unmute and ask your question, that work. Yeah, with this smaller group, if you just want to unmute and ask a question, please feel free. And if I can't answer, then we'll get you an answer. What questions or comments does anyone have? I know I can't have covered everything, so. No questions. What about any of the planning team members? I know other than Eric and Pat, we have a few other planning team members that are on the call. Any of you have anything you want to join in and comment specific to your jurisdiction?
Yeah, Mark Westberg from, where am I from? Wheat Ridge. Sorry, long day. Can you flash up the schedule again?
Yeah. Oops, wrong way.
Thanks. I was just going to get a screen capture of that real quick.
Cool. And there's nothing, again, magic about those dates, but that's what we're targeting. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm good.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? I should mention, looks like Greg dropped off. We had Greg Mosier from Westminster on the call earlier. He's the emergency manager for. If you wondered why Westminster isn't participating in this, it's because they have their own mitigation plan. They've done a standalone plan as the city of Westminster due to their circumstances and position. So that's the only reason they're not in here. And they've been participating in the process and reviewing the plan. You know, we know that one of the things that we do as part of this process, we know that disasters don't tend to respect county lines and, you know, the lines we as humans like to draw on the maps and call borders. Storms don't notice or pay much attention to those. So part of this process is that part of this review process is we ask the surrounding counties and jurisdictions to review the plan and comment on it. And so that if there's, you know, we make sure that it's coordinated with the surrounding counties and communities. Other questions, comments, or concerns?
Scott, this is Pat O'Connell from Jefferson County. I have just a question. It was one of the early slides, and it was based on the survey results, right? I think there were 900 plus survey responses on those. Is the feedback that we saw pretty consistent with other entities, either across the state or across the country, as far as kind of the risk and where the county, you know, where this mitigation plan should be headed?
It is. I mean, there's definitely, we see variations throughout the community. Obviously, you know, if we were doing the Weld County plan, tornado would rank much higher. You know, if we were out on the east, like we're currently doing the Aurora plan, wildfire isn't as big a risk there. So, I mean, it obviously varies by jurisdiction. But yes, what we did see was, and you'll notice that these rankings are pretty close to the hazard rankings that the planning team arrived at, and that's partly because we considered this opinion when we considered those. But what I would say is this reflects a pretty well-informed public. There's not a wide disparity. What we do see in some jurisdictions where the public has one perception of what the risk is, and it's wildly out from what local government or the so-called experts think that it is. And then we look at that and see, okay, well, does the public know something that we don't? Or is a public education piece where we haven't explained them to them or haven't communicated that risk? One thing I would highlight, since you brought it up, Pat, is that you notice dam failure ranked fairly low on the public survey, and it got scored higher by the planning team. And partly that's because we got some new data and inundation mapping from the state of Colorado. So we have a better understanding of what the risk is. Obviously, dam failures are extremely rare in Colorado and nationally, but they're kind of one of those, if it does happen or if something were to happen, it'd be a pretty bad day. So that was actually ranked a little higher than what the public perceived. Similarly, the list of proposed mitigation actions, this is really consistent with what we see throughout Colorado as well.
Right, even the mitigation actions, like, as expected, it ties in very nicely with that slide, but it is important, critical to be able to take into account all the residents' concerns. They know what's going on in their backyard. Exactly. And what those concerns are. So I think this one is really telling.
Yeah. And I should also say, I'm glad you brought it up, Pat, because one of the other questions in the survey is just what else it was more of a narrative question of what are the other things we should be concerned about, or what are the things that you're concerned about as public? What do we need to know? That's harder to summarize on a slide. 500 individual narrative responses. But for the folks who did, we did go through and read all of those responses and reviewed those with the planning team. So let's see, got a couple comments in the chat. Just thanking you for your hard work. Looks great. Thanks. Okay. Thank you all. Other questions or comments? Let me zip back here to the end. So there's Erica's email address, which is also again on that Jefferson County website that we linked to earlier, as well as my address if you want to get a hold of us for any reason. You said if you do have any technical difficulties or anything with the virtual page or anything, please let us know. And if we have to send it by smoke signals or courier or whatever, we want to get as many people as we can a copy of the plan to review. So we'll figure some way to get it to you. So, and to get your comments to us. That's really all I have on this side. Erica, any last thoughts or anything you want to send us on our way with?
No, just thank you everyone for taking the time to participate in this. It's extremely important to the county to have very just thoughtful mitigation actions, have a very well thought out plan. Please help us extend our reach and share the opportunity to provide public comment. We really appreciate it and look forward to seeing everyone's feedback. So thank you again.
Okay. Thank you all and have a good night.